morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to this. I am Andreas, and welcome to Grace Healing Ministries, our virtual studio. I have with me Larry again today. Hey, Larry, how are you doing today?
Great, terrific. Another wonderful day in Maine.
It is same here in Georgia. A little sticky still, but it's good to be alive.
Yes, it is. A wonderful thing.
So today we picked an interesting topic. We're going to explore intercession.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as I always do, I had to research just a little bit to understand, from an earthly plane, what does intercession mean? And, if you go to the dictionary, it says an intercession is the action of intervening on behalf of another, or the act of mediating, for example, mediating a dispute, etc.
Yes.
So from a scriptural point of view, I was looking and to see if I can find something on a spiritual level what intercession means, and then I'm going to ask you a question, Larry. I read in Hebrews 7:25, chapter 25, verse 25, therefore he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. He and him, referring to Jesus, YahShua.
Yes.
And Larry, how would you, in just a couple of sentences, describe or explain intercession? It may need a lot of sentences.
What you just chose is the perfect beginning, because YahShua is the supreme intercessor. He intercedes, he mediates. He is the connecting point between the Spirit of God and the fullness of creation. All that was manifested by the living breath of God into creation is made known of its existence through the interceding nature of YahShua. YahShua is literally the visual aspect of God, the soul presence, or they describe as the flesh of God. And the Aramaic word for flesh means the soul or connecting point, because even us, we are spirit, flesh, and body. And the flesh is the connecting point from spirit to body. So here we have God as spirit, YahShua, the connecting point to all things of the body of God, all things through all creation. So YahShua is the interceder in the fact that he brings forth the understanding of that which is God through to the body, and also relates that which was within the body back unto Creator. So it's interceding the need and being the intermediary or the mediator to it. And then what he had done was he had also established and he had reordered things within the heavens and entered upon the belly of the dead, ministered unto the dead. Those are the captives that we've named in other videos, and called us to the royal priesthood. Within the royal priesthood, that is not some lofty title of being a priest within a certain church or a certain religious being. That is embracing the truth of the one intercessor, YahShua. That is embracing the truth that you can function as God's presence. God manifests through you so that you might intercede for others. And when YahShua said that you will do greater things than I, as the Spirit of God dwells within you, he wasn't kidding. We just didn't get the point. And we haven't been doing greater things than he, because we keep making him the only one that does the work, instead of saying, well, no, YahShua said that we were supposed to step into this role now, that we are supposed to be in that intercessory role. The ones who step in when if we see a person living or dwelling upon the street in a homeless situation, we would intercede for them in the state of prayer that they might be elevated and increased within their understanding of God within. And yes, if their journey of life is to be a homeless individual, they've chosen it, they want to exist within it, they love, because there are people that do that, they love that nature of being. It's not my place to intercede to change them from that state, but it is my place to intercede that they would be blessed in the highest recognition within that state. And I may be moved to recognize within this prayer that homeless individual is not supposed to be homeless, and all of a sudden my prayer would be shifting towards an increase, an elevation of those who surround him, to see the value of his abilities, the increased ability of his gifts and talents when he's applied in actual effort and actually bringing something to societal return. And if I'm interceding, it might have been the one thing that that individual needed to overcome the barriers that he had formed within his life, or that she had experienced, that thrust them into that ground that they're in. So if we're the intercessor, releasing the spiritual captives of shame, guilt, fear, anger, unforgiveness, or whatever spiritually drove them to, or spiritual dependency, spiritual addiction, if we become the intercessor while they are veiled in this state of spiritual oppression, we now become the intercessor to shift them from that place, and they'll either function at a higher level within that journey they chose as homeless, or they will shift out of that realm of a homeless setting.
So we really have a potentially powerful, important role to play as intercessors. Yes. Now, what I find really interesting, as we humans tend to do, we tend to misconstrue power. I mean, I'm reading some interesting things here, and I'd like to share a quick story here.
Please.
About a Buddhist. And what it's going to demonstrate is maybe the different approach from different religions as to how we interact with people or may intercede with people. A Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka who was acquainted with both Christianity and Buddhism was once asked what he thought was the great difference between the two. He replied, "There's much that is good in each of them, and probably in all religions. But what seems to me to be the greatest difference is that you Christians know what is right and have the power to do it, while we Buddhists know what is right but have no any such power." To me, this little story just signifies that we have to be careful with that power. We have to know how to deal with it and how to help and intercede, right? There's one thing also that I found which was kind of disturbing when I looked at, tried to find some argumentation about what intercession is. I found words like a plan for battle, armed for battle, persisting in battle, and all that, that we need to have the right tools, and we, the incredible access to God that we have through intercession. Once you are in God's presence, you can now discover his battle plan. Right. That doesn't go with me.
See, there again, it's like what you just said about the Buddhists saying they have the power to execute it, and we have the knowing of the right, but we don't have the power to execute it. The reality is, people, we've said this 1,001 times through our different videos. Seek God first. If you do not seek into the nature of source, you will start writing the nature of your perceptions, your influence, your exacted will over God's. You will literally supplant God for what you think is right, even if it doesn't align with the nature of God. Because it's like, how many times did YahShua go out there and fight a battle? 0. How many times did YahShua say, take up arms? 0. And when he was teaching people, he was teaching things of a spiritual nature, yet they didn't even understand the things of the earth. He was teaching people that that we are dealing with things of a spiritual nature, things that emerge from the order of principalities, the spiritual realm. And if we are going to be intercessors, we have to remember that we have to open up to see the divine perspective over things. And the divine perspective is not limited to the human being. It is extended to all beings, spirit beings, animal beings, human beings, all creation. So if we become so self-centered, so self-oriented that we are not even willing to seek God first, we are going to intercede, and we are going to start to dictate into creation prayers we form when we are in the spirit of war. Prayers we form when we are unforgiveness. Prayers we form when we are in a state of judgment. And then we wonder why. We can look back over the last 2,000 years and wonder, well, why does war keep happening? Why does hate keep rising? Because people are not seeking the presence of God first to understand, okay, what does God wish for me in this time? What does God wish for my brother? And again, this example of the homeless individual, it is not my place to change the nature of how that person chooses to live. It is my place to intercede that they would be blessed in functioning at the highest state they choose to live.
How do you do that for that homeless person? Intercede, as an example.
Well, a beautiful example is one that came forth when my son and I had at the time, I think James was about 13 years old, and we were walking through the city of Boston. And there's many times where you come upon homeless in different situations, and you can tell if you're discerning, you're seeking God first, because it's so easy to get caught into what is called the demonic realm of spiritual sympathy. Through sympathy, you are governed and you become part of the suffrage. You become part of that person's pain, and now you will form prayers that will be part of that person's pain, and it will create a greater battle extreme for them, because you will become the nature of the suffrages around them through sympathy. So what we do is, as we're walking along, we're in a state of discerning, not sympathy. We're in a state of compassion, not sympathy. And as we're moving along, we had passed by a number of homeless, but in discerning, I could tell they were not homeless. It was known within my heart, and I looked to my son, the child, and I said, what's in your heart? And he says, that doesn't seem like that's true. That person doesn't. And I'm like, right. And it was known within us that this person was playing a game of manipulation and deception, and they were manipulating people through spiritual sympathy. Because we were not governed through sympathy, we were not governed through guilt, and we were not governed through shame. We were able to see through what they were presenting to us as a tool of manipulation to gain resource in order to survive. And some of those people would turn around and leave those street corners and walk over to a Mercedes-Benz and drive home. However, we were walking along at one point, and I think we had just left like Chinatown, and we were walking away from Chinatown. And it was into this small little shopping district area. As we're coming along, I felt the presence of God move through me so powerful, and I saw this beautiful young woman kneeling down and holding a poster card in front of her, and she had a cup out in front of her. And there was just this wave of recognition that this was genuine. And I kept walking. And we got about 3 storefronts beyond her. And I just looked over and I grabbed my son's shoulder, and I turned him to me, and I looked at him and I said, well, what's in your heart? He says, we're supposed to go back to that girl. And again, I'm not calculating. What am I supposed to do? I'm just in prayer. What is my responsibility? No, I pray. And as I pray, my son and I turn around and we walk back. And we noticed that her little cup thing, and it was obvious that she'd been sitting there for a while, because it was like she was kind of like nestled in around these street signs and a little parking meter. And she had her card out in front of her, and there wasn't a single thing in that cup. And she was kind of getting all, like she was trying to shift and get a comfortable position. And I just reached down and I wanted to say hi to her. And I forget exactly the details of how it unfolded. But as I reached to her, she just looked up, and I just said, I wanted you to know that you are seen and you are loved. And she just broke into tears. And I said, my son would love to hug you as well. And she just stood up and she melted into an embrace with me. And then she melted into an embrace with my son. And she was just getting, you could tell there were like waves of peace going through her. And she was not in a distressful call. She was in a blessed realization of being recognized. And I embraced her once again. And I just said, I just want you to know that we will hold you in prayer as we continue through our day. And I had taken like $20 out and I put it in her cup. And I swear to you, Andreas, in that moment of intercession, prayerful recognition of her, and then a physical and demonstrative act, all of a sudden, people that were standing off to the corners, a couple of them like standing in a storefront, they must have been poised and waiting there because they weren't seeking prayer. So they were probably wondering if this was even true. Did this girl really need help? Why would such a beautiful young lady need help? Why would you? Well, because she was also being oppressed. She was being manipulated and governed, being possibly forced into a sex situation where she had to give over sex and she didn't want to be a part of that. So as you put the $20 in, it was, and she said, oh my God, this is going to be the seed. This is going to be the source of my luck today. And then she sat down, and as I put the $20 in the cup, people started flooding out from this little quad sitting area and the little storefronts. People kind of, and that cup was overflowing within less than a minute because of the intercessional awareness of God moving through me to do God's dictate, not mine. Because mine also would have been, geez, there's this beautiful young lady. She's in a homeless situation. I don't want to make her uncomfortable. I'm a guy, 58 years old at the time, 55 or whatever, 56. And I didn't want to violate her space, but I also wanted to bless her in some way. So I kept walking in prayer until it moved me to look to my son. Because it wasn't just interceding for her, it was also interceding for my son to gain a higher awareness of his responsibility and role in intercession. It wasn't just for her. And it was also for every single person that was standing there hiding before each door lintel or whatever, just standing there. How can I help this girl without causing a problem? How can I do this? What does she? Is she real? Is she really actually needing this money? Mm-hmm. All of them going through this mind chatter. And that moment of intercession, prayerful awareness of God as I moved along, seeking God's presence, became God completing something more grand than I could think of on my own. It moved the crowd to respond. And she was just sitting there trembling and in tears and in joy and in thankful and gratitude. And she stood up again, came to us as we were trying to get away. I just want to thank you so much. I'm so grateful. This was my source of luck today. And I said, no, it's your source of grace. God loves you dearly. And then she went back and sat down.
And not only did move God, the situation right there when this happened, but it went beyond that. We can't even see it. Blessings were extended to these people into their lives, into their families, into their interactions. Blessings are extended to me right now and the listeners, because this is such a powerful example to me that now when I meet the homeless person, I will view it different. I will deal with it differently than being that judging mind that I'm usually, a lot of people are when they see situations.
And I think one of the things that we also have to touch on before we wrap up here is the importance of remembering what you said of the power we hold. Because we also have to make sure that our first surrender is unto God. Because it is too easy for us to intercede based upon the spirit of war. We could become war. We could perpetuate war. We could perpetuate suffering. Or we could become manipulation. We could be manipulated by those persons that are using us and they will use the power of prayer that exists within us to their gain, to their betterment, not to evidence and reveal God, divine glory. And what I believe our role is as intercessors is to reveal God's glory. What is God's glory? Each person blessed in the remembrance of their origin, each person blessed in the holy attributes of God in any situation they face. So if you have this homeless person, are they in deep despair? Let's transform that despair into joy and hopefulness. Let's reveal the glory of God by the attributes of God presented into that person through the living prayer that we've become in that moment. It is about participating in the interceding nature of that which is God emerging no matter what the situation presents. And that can only come by surrendering all that we are to become all that God is. And we cannot embrace any veil of self or any veil of the past or any righteousness that we fear we form by Christian understanding or by Buddhist understanding or Taoist understanding or Hindu power. We must surrender to return to origin before religious definition. And then we will see truth emerge for the person that we're standing before.
That's the goal I'm setting for myself for this week, to try to get into that state of discernment and compassion in any situation.
Can you remove that word try?
I will.
I'm going to surrender into the nature of that which is God. I'm not going to try to surrender things. I'm going to surrender into that which is God.
Perfect.
Not by attempt, but by actual realization.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we fall flat on our faces, God can use us flat on his face, on our face, you know?
Yeah.
We would become that dressed covering over a mud puddle for a woman to trot over, you know? So God can use us for everything. Do the full surrender and let God manifest through you, and God will transform the nature of that surrender into something of magnificence. Like that simple act of reaching over and taking hold of my son's shoulder and finding discernment in him. Yeah, we're going to go back to that girl. We had no clue that it would magnify into this expression of changing the hearts of all people that were sitting there frozen and unable to move around her. Mm-hmm. It's just beautiful how God can magnify it through surrender.
Yep. Surrender. Okay, a new word I'm focusing on as well. And, you know, I'm just thinking, Larry, we need to continue next week. I'd like to kind of continue on that theme next week. And I'd like to get into also how can we, you know, use the Book of Blessings, for example. I don't want to get into it now, but because that's an intercessory tool, you know, maybe that's something we can talk about next week. But it
is something that we should talk about next week. But I will state for people briefly, the Book of Blessings is something that was formed prophetically through grace healing. And anytime that you have a need or a fear or something that is rising, sickness, disease, whatever, and you present it to grace healing, we don't take the need in prayer. We surrender unto God and intercede for you, and then we receive a prayer of blessing. Not, oh my God, free my brother from cancer. Yahweh, thank you that you have freed your son from the spirit of grief, that his lungs would move with greater strength. He would find freedom from all medical influence and all personal suffering or any spiritual influence. Then we record that within the Book of Blessings. And we dwell upon that prayer each day in intercedal awareness, where we intercede on the blessed result, not the suffrage the person's going through. And that's a basic Reader's Digest version of what we have there.
Great. And for all you listeners, if you go to gracehealing.org or gracehealing.video, you'll find a lot of resources, again, that to build on what you heard and what we discussed today. But I think that's it for today. Larry, what do you think?
Yes, sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's great discussion. And we see everyone next week again.
Yes, and I look forward to explaining more about how that works and the measurable results that we've seen with the Book of Blessings as well. So
perfect. See you all then.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.